1989, Britain finally voted to leave the European Union. This historic victory was achieved despite 4.5 years of the European Union and its supporters all desperately trying to overturn the largest democratic vote in British history. But we finally made the European Parliament accept that Britain knows best. On our final day in Brussels, we even received a standing ovation as British MEPs left the plenary for the final ever time. And here is some previously unseen footage that I took on that day.
Thank you. Cheers. The French guy wearing his flag. Beautiful. Some people actually like it. Thank you. Yay. You did it.
Great to see respect from the Eurosceptics in the Parliament towards us. They respect our right to leave this place. They respect what we've done here and they respect the impact that we've had. And now it's time to leave.
Go what, Michael? Look,
great moment.
They're actually applauding us. They like us here, some of them.
Great moment.
It was a long march to freedom, a battle that for some spanned decades. But for the 17.4 million, it began in earnest on June the 23rd, 2016. This special edition of Unlocked is a look back at that momentous moment in our national history. Today's show features a dozen Democrats, all of whom literally gave the finger to Brussels when they pressed the button to leave. In the studio, I'm joined by Ben Habib, and down the line we have the Right Honourable Ann Widdecombe, Baroness Claire Fox, Chairman of the Reform Party, Richard Tice, and businessman and a former MEP colleague, Rupert Lowe. As well as a fond look back, we will also look ahead and lay out a roadmap for an optimistic post-Brexit Britain to help rebuild our way out of the twin perils of the European Union and the COVID pandemic. So, first of all, first guest today is going to be the Right Honourable Ann Widdecombe. Ben, I'm going to hand to you.
Well, we all know and love Anne. We remember her absolutely forceful speeches in the European Parliament. But I want to ask Anne, why is it that you became a Eurosceptic, Anne?
I think it really began to crystallise when I was a minister for 7 years in the major government. And I realised on almost a daily basis, certainly on a weekly basis, that Britain could not make its own laws. That if we wanted to pass a law, we had to make sure it was compatible with EU law. If it wasn't, we couldn't pass it, whether we wanted to or not. If we wanted not to do something that the EU told us to do, we couldn't do that either. We had to do whatever they told us to do. And after nearly 7 years of that, I had come to the very firm conclusion that we were not actually, in any real sense of the word, a sovereign state. And of course, if any proof were needed, you only have to look now at what is happening with the vaccines. And don't take even Eurosceptics' words for it. Just look at what a major German newspaper came up with this week and said that the mess over vaccines in Europe was, and I quote, the best possible advertisement for Brexit. It certainly is.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, Ben, when I saw that, that was like The Guardian coming out in support of Brexit. It was absolutely astonishing, Anne. And what were the sort of key moments for you? Was there a moment when the penny just dropped and you became a Eurosceptic?
I think it was a gradual process. As I say, 6.5 years as a minister absolutely crystallised for me that we weren't a sovereign state. And I think the final point for me came as late as 2019, when I seriously had enough of the messing about and the consistent failures of Theresa May to deliver anything. And I thought, right, this is it. I'm going to leave the party that I've belonged to for 55 years. I'm going to join the Brexit party. And I think that was probably the moment that I would point to where I crossed a Rubicon.
Well, I mean, we're all certainly glad that you did. We're off to a straightforward smash to the boundary there by the opening batsman, Widdecombe. Now we're going to rattle through our guests. We're on a tight schedule today. We have a bunch of play-ins from MEPs who can't be here. The first one we're going to play in right now is from Jake Pugh.
So 1 year on, and how does it feel? It feels brilliant, doesn't it? We won. But why was it so important? It's always been about democracy and accountability. The ballot box is the one place where we're all equal. In society, the rich and the powerful, the media, big business has much more influence. But only in the ballot box are we equal. Rich, poor, old, young, black, white, male, female. One person, one vote. It's 90 years since women first got the vote. And then over successive decades, British parliamentarians transferred those powers, your powers, across to the EU. And that power was more remote and unaccountable and unelected. So the vote has repatriated that power so we can hold our politicians to account for their policy choices. You won. So to all 17.4 million brilliant Brexiteers, mic drop.
The marvellous science of Jake Pugh dropping a microphone. He almost looked a bit cool.
He looked cool. I didn't know that was a microphone. Took me a while to figure out what it was he was holding.
What do you think it was?
I'm not saying.
His pacemaker or something. Anyway, superb input there from Jake Pugh. Miss you, mate. Okay, moving swiftly onwards. Since the Brexit referendum, since we got out, Baroness Claire Fox was elevated to the House of Lords, where she continues to mercilessly keep up the pressure and fight. It's been a joy to watch. You know, Foxy still creating mischief in the Lords as you did in Brussels and Strasbourg. So Claire Fox, next section of the show. When you were unveiled as a Brexit Party MEP, it surprised a lot of people because here was someone from the traditional left. And I think that was a really brilliant moment where you could see it was left and right, not right and wrong. It was brilliant. Claire, we want to talk to you about the actual result of the referendum, how things went wrong and why that steeled your resolve to step up to the plate.
I think the morning afterwards, when we realised that we'd actually voted to leave, the momentous dawning on people, millions of people, that they were on the winning side in history for the first time ever was a great joy, wasn't it? Millions of people who had really felt that their lives were irrelevant, that they'd been marginalised, and suddenly they'd been asked an important constitutional question. They were told that they should vote Remain, but they thought about it themselves and voted to leave, and they won. And everyone was kind of shell-shocked because this was people who suddenly had been politicised in a democratic sense during the referendum to think that maybe there was something you could do to have control over your destiny. So that was the moment of excitement. Within days, it turned sour, even hours, because the establishment and established figures in the media, in academia, in all of the great institutions of state, instead of saying, well done, everyone, you won, that side won, immediately said, you got it wrong, you didn't know what you were voted for, you're reactionary, knuckle-dragging, gammon types who need to be taught a lesson, that even though we asked you which way to vote, you actually are going to be ignored despite that. So it was that mixture of great joy, great excitement to have made a difference, suddenly followed very quickly by the realisation that there was an establishment in the way of that democratic decision that were going to stop that history-making moment actually coming to fruition.
When was that moment for you, Claire? Because, my memory of it was actually thinking Theresa May gets it. She's going to deliver Brexit. She did that brilliant speech on the steps of Downing Street, and then the Lancaster House, no deal is better than a bad deal. And I was kind of caught up in all of that. But obviously you saw it slightly differently to me. So when did the penny drop?
No, I understand. I mean, I think the point was that the media pundits and the commentators and so on turned very quickly against the vote. But it is true that a lot of us believe that Theresa May had actually the lesson, as it were, and was going to deliver on it. I actually argued with people who said, because in a way you kind of thought she made that speech, you assumed that behind the scenes people were getting on with it, and that even though there was a Remain alliance calling for a second referendum, you assumed that they would sort of be ignored and that possibly there was negotiations going on. Where it really came to it probably wasn't till really late, till Chequers, right? When I suddenly thought, and people would say to me, the establishment are going to, I thought they were being conspiratorial lunatics. You know, I was thinking, what are you talking about? Of course they've got to do it. We voted for it. And even the sour grapes of the Remain alliance won't stop it. Yeah. But as the parliamentary shenanigans continued, and suddenly the realization from the agreement that came out, I suddenly thought we'd been conned. You know, basically, oh my God, we'd been sold out. And the fury and frustration, and I felt naive that I had in any way imagined that behind the scenes there were people trying to honour this.
Yeah, well, Claire, the thing that happened was that fury and that indignation, you certainly turned for the common good. And I've been on the receiving end of it a few times in chamber. And, you know, a lot of people don't understand that Claire Fox gave the most speeches in the European Parliament of any MEP.
Did she?
And they all thought we'd just stay at the bar doing nothing. That was some other members of the party.
That's why you didn't realise. Oh.
Yeah. Let's not talk about me. Let's move quickly on. With great input there, Claire Fox. We now have another playing from our friend in the north, in Hartlepool, MEP, former MEP friend of ours, Mr. John Tennant.
Well, it's been 1 year on since that historic day when we as MEPs voted to lose our jobs. Probably the only time in my life I'd ever be happy to lose my job. Why? Because we spent nearly 4 years pushing and pressing the government to deliver the biggest democratic mandate the United Kingdom has ever seen. Leading up to that moment, Brexit was in serious doubt. We had MPs doing all they possibly could to stop Brexit, and it was the Brexit Party that changed all of that. Now, I have always taken the view that we should be in control of our own affairs, with democratic accountability, and the power of the vote being held in the highest possible regard. I like to think that Brexit and the Brexit Party really highlighted just how detached the establishment is from ordinary folk. And it was the efforts of all of you who kept the government's feet to the fire that led to that iconic evening as the clock struck 11 p.m. in January last year. So, without further ado, well done, all of you.
Thank you very much, John. Now, our next guest, I have a huge amount of admiration for. He's a man that was with the Brexit debate before the referendum, immediately after the referendum. He stood firm, shoulder to shoulder with Brexiteers for the last 5 years, and he's still fighting for reform. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Tice.
A good intro.
Hi, thank you, Ben. How are we all right?
Good.
Unbelievable, isn't it? A year on. I mean, where's time flies? But just listening to Claire there, reminding us of the history from the referendum. I knew there was a problem very quickly, and within a month of the referendum, I'd set up the lobby group, Leave Means Leave, because I just sensed that something bad was happening. And we all did trust, as you said, Theresa May. But ultimately, you know, when Chequers came, that was the end. That was the moment, really, that I think everybody, you know, suddenly realised what was going on. And that's when we suddenly started having mass rallies, and there was a real huge groundswell. And before we knew it, 6 months later, we were marching from Sunderland to London. And then the Brexit Party launched, and, you know, thankfully, we changed the course of history. Extraordinary. And isn't it amazing that actually the value of Brexit, you know, we all thought it was about independence and taking back control, but none of us really imagined that within a year that Brexit would literally be saving lives in a way that, you know, we had no comprehension of, but that actually it highlights the need to be independent, sovereign, to make what decisions you need to make quickly for the benefit of our own nation. And goodness me, we've really seen it in the last few months, and thank heavens, literally, you know, Brexit, you know, has saved lives.
So, Richard, what was the exact moment? Do you remember that specific moment when you realised the Brexit Party needed to be launched? You decided just to get out there and get on with it.
So with Nigel, when we were running Leave Means Leave in the autumn of 2018, we looked at it, and we knew we were coming up to the what was the December date. We knew that wouldn't work. We knew then it would be sort of March, but we realised that the anger wasn't great enough, and we actually polled it, and the anger wasn't right. But it was basically February time, and Nigel knew, and we had an internal poll, and we knew that it was ready, it was ripe, and we had to sort of run two tracks, because at that moment we were also incredibly worried that there would be a second referendum. So we had to keep Leave Means Leave ready to go down the second referendum route, but also to set up the Brexit Party, because we knew that we'd be fighting the European elections. Yeah, and I remember getting the call. You actually proved to be a brilliant salesman, Richard. You twisted my arm on a Sunday night, and you told me I had to sign by the Monday lunch. I remember I told my wife, a Remainer, that I was standing for the Brexit Party, and she had this 1,000-yard stare, Richard, which lasted several days. Anyway, all of us from various backgrounds, we did step up, we did get involved, and what a bunch we were, what a diverse bunch. One of the stories I think isn't told often enough. It's just the rich backgrounds that we came from, very different backgrounds, people with business skills, media skills, not your usual career politicians. So it's a tremendous tribute, Richard, to you, and of course to Nigel Farage, party leader. Quickly moving on now, we're coming back to Richard for his input and how we move out of this mess, post-Brexit and post-COVID. I know he's got some brilliant ideas. Before we do that, please, if you want to become a supporter of Unlocked, please click on the blue support button on Facebook, or follow us on Facebook at Unlocked United Kingdom. Before we move on to our next guest, Rupert Lowe, we have a short play-in from my favourite blonde Brexit bombshell, Belinda de Lucy.
Like many of you, I was sitting on the sofa shouting at the telly, screaming at the injustice and the lies that were being spun, and the mistruths, and how the whole Brexit narrative was suddenly owned by Remainers, and the little people of the country who had nothing but their vote were being completely squashed and demonised. I was furious, and I dropped everything. I phoned up my university and was like, right, I'm doing a master's in EU law. I became a protester outside Parliament. I had no political experience whatsoever. I'm a total social wimp when it comes to conflict normally, but this mattered. This was so important, and cheers to every single one of you who became a political activist overnight and attended rallies. It mattered. You played your part, and Brexit is literally saving lives. I feel so sorry for our European friends. The EU are doing them such a disservice. Every time there's a crisis, they let them down. I'm glad we escaped. It's all down to you, and I can't thank you enough, my fellow political activists, and it just shows you never again will they take advantage of their power. Thank you.
You know, if you ever doubt the sincerity of Belinda de Lucy, you can see it there. If you bottle that spirit, what an amazing performer. Time and time again, when she was speaking in chamber, but also just as a motivational force to all of us. Yeah. I mean, someone that's so positive and so upbeat. Pleasure to work alongside her. Okay, I'd like to move on now to my next guest on Unlock today, Rupert Lowe, a guy who stood as an MEP in the West Midlands. I first met him on the campaign trail in a Wetherspoons in Wolverhampton. Politics isn't all glamour, is it, Ben Habib? A tremendous businessman, and I wanted to talk to you today, Rupert, about some of the frankly grotesque, eye-popping, eye-watering revelations that we discovered as Brexit Party MEPs out there, really creating mischief, getting inside committees, unearthing nuggets of information. And Rupert, you are really, really central to this as a premium mischief maker, because you were in the budgetary committee, weren't you? And you were coming out with all sorts of stuff which made great press. Rupert Lowe, can you tell us about some of the true horrors of what you learned about the inner workings of the European Union?
Well, yeah, absolutely, Martin. From my point of view, it was no surprise when I got, and I was elected as an MEP thanks to Nigel and Richard and their bravery in standing up for the people of Britain. I basically confirmed my view that 27 countries basically acting as a committee can't agree that water is wet. And as a result, the budgetary committee was quite an interesting experience, because you find once you have a committee, there are people who are capable of manipulating committees. Most of them don't have much principle or logic, but they're very good at playing one at two ends off against the middle. So it was quite an interesting experience. Budgeting EU style, Martin, basically involves working out what it's cost to run 3 parliament buildings, all the infrastructure, thousands of staff, all the IT, the fleet of cars, moving from Brussels to Strasbourg because of treaty requirements. The cost is huge. I wish I could run my companies like this, because all that happens ultimately is that they work out what it costs and they mutualize it across the 27 countries. Ultimately, the people of Europe are paying for this largesse. There's very little logic to it, and it's deeply concerning, really. And there are very few people who can get away with it. It's helped, of course, by quantitative easing, which allows all governments now to create money and unbalanced books. So I think it's become endemic, but the EU probably trumped everybody else's ace at it.
Mm. Rupert, you had the great pleasure of meeting Barnier during the height of our negotiations with him. What was your take on the man?
Well, I met him quite a lot, Ben, because he stayed often at the Chateau de Lille, where we used to stay. So we actually got to know him a bit outside Parliament. And then, because I was on the Brexit committee as well as the budget committee, I requested a meeting with him, principally to say to him that I thought he was overplaying his hand. And if he wasn't careful, he could end up with no deal, which is actually what Europe should have feared most. I found him, in a way, I admire him. I like him as a human being. He's a very, very proud Frenchman. He's a fully committed European. And half of me admired him for that, and half of me wished I had him replacing most of our Europhile negotiators who were acting for the UK. So I don't dislike him as a man. I think he's probably guilty of being a bit arrogant, but he's a committed European, and to his credit, if you were a European, he did a pretty good job for them. Because with the trade deficit that we have with Europe, it should have been us calling the shots, not them.
Yeah, I remember meeting him a few times. He shook our hand. He tried to break my hand. He had a really, really firm handshake. I think actually he was just trying to inflict pain on us. No, as Brexiteers, I think it was a direct attack.
No, he's a great guy. He's basically he's a proud Frenchman, and he's very pleased to be part of the European project, which, as we know, I'm afraid is destined to fail, because the euro is bringing untold misery unnecessarily upon thousands and millions of people in Europe.
But I do think you raised a fair point. He was a great negotiator, and often I think we all wish, it's like that footballer you really don't like, but you wish he played for your team. He was a bit like one of those. Rupert Lowe, fabulous. Stick around. We're having the roundtable next about the most ridiculous moments. I know you're going to have a lot of those, as well as the ideas for a brighter Britain post-Brexit and post-COVID. Before we move on to that, though, we have another play-in from one of our MEP colleagues, Mr. Matthew Patten.
I can't believe that this time last year we were in the European Union voting on the last stages of the UK leaving the EU. And I'm really proud, and I know I stood as an MEP because I absolutely wanted to see the promise made to the 17.4 million people who voted for us to leave upheld in that incredible referendum. But if a week's a long time in politics, boy, what a difference a year makes. And so, for me, I don't think this is about looking backwards. I think we need to look forwards, and we need to think about, how do we plan our way through this kind of post-Brexit, post-COVID world that we're now in? How can we take responsibility for our own actions, and how can we add to our families, to our communities, to the places where we live, where we work, and our place in the world? So, proud as I am about that time, and pleased as I am that we're out of the EU, the challenge for me is not what happened back then, but what are we going to do next?
Well, you can't get more Brexit than a green wax barber in the countryside. It's almost like the sort of signature outfit of the Brexiteer there from Matthew Patten in full regalia. Anyway, let's move swiftly onwards now to an informal roundtable chat, reliving some of the preposterous, ridiculous and eye-opening moments from inside the chamber, inside the belly of the beast. So let's go back to the top of the show. Ann Widdecombe. Do you remember, Anne, any standout moments? You gave some humdinger speeches. You really tore into them. Any real standout moments, Ann Widdecombe?
Yes, one that just amused me tremendously, rather than had any very serious consequences. There was a debate going on in the Chamber, a very worthy debate, about animal welfare. And I stood up and I made a speech saying that we should be banning live exports altogether, and they were all going, yes, yes, and nodding, and here, and all this sort of stuff. And then I said, and of course, when we have Brexit, all the animals will cheer because Britain will be able to do that. And there was a sudden silence. They didn't quite know any longer how to react. So one moment they'd been completely on side, and the next moment they'd sort of been shocked into reality. And I very much treasured that reaction, and I do wish I'd had a cine film, because I'm old-fashioned and none of this video stuff. I do wish I'd had a cine film of it.
Yeah, and we certainly did get some great footage, though, of you, Anne. I remember right from the very, very start when you made that brilliant speech where you referred to slaves and their masters. I was back in the UK on media duty. Thank you, Ann Widdecombe. I was taking the bullets for you all day long, but that's what we did. I think we created huge waves right from the start. We were sent in there to create mischief, and by God, we achieved that, didn't we? Yeah. So let's move on now to Claire Fox. Claire, not sure of a word or two. Most ridiculous moments or memories from the European Union, Claire Fox.
Well, you know, when I went to the Parliament, I assumed that the hostility would come from the European MEPs from other member states. I was expecting, you know, I mean, they showed us a certain amount of quiet disdain and contempt, but they weren't particularly hostile. And some of them were actually rather like anthropology, rather intrigued by us and kind of came to kind of check us out. But what I wasn't expecting, I don't know why, was that the people who would prove to be the most vile, most, utterly full of hatred for us were our fellow UK MEPs, the Lib Dems, the Labour Party, the Greens. To be frank, the Tories weren't exactly friendly because we had actually just thrashed them in the election. But it was, what I also noticed was that they would stand up in the chamber and they would just, I mean, they'd always moan about misinformation, but they gave it in droves. So they'd stand up and they'd say, we want you all to know that the majority of people in the UK have changed their minds. We want you all to know that the majority of people in the UK were influenced by Russian bots or misinformation on the side of a book. It's all been a terrible mistake. Don't worry, we're staying. We're going to deal with them. And of course, luckily, we were there to correct this, and they were vile to us. They wouldn't share cars with us. A Northwest MEP, who will remain nameless, who wouldn't get in the same car as, I think, Ben, warn people off me, would go around like a stalker, saying, don't talk to that woman, she's evil. This kind of thing, utterly preposterous. So my happy story is right at the end. Quite a number of Federalist MEPs who did not support Brexit came up, shook my hand, thanked me for my contribution in the chamber, and said, to be honest with you, we didn't understand the mood of Brexit in the UK before you lot arrived, but listening to you all, we at least understood that you meant it, and we'd been misled before that. And I think that was a great contribution we did, even within the European Parliament. They knew we meant it.
Yeah, superb.
Well, you're right, Claire. It was me that Labour MEP refused to share a cab with. It was eye-boggling, actually, because it was a people carrier. And you would have thought I could have snuck in there somewhere without offending her. Anyway, I couldn't. I had to get another cab. But moving on. Richard, what was your kind of takeaway moment from our European parliamentary experience?
It was the first moment of walking in to that huge building in Strasbourg, and there were these butlers welcoming us in white tie and tails. Also, I mean, it's the sort of thing you'd expect to see, in a sort of aristocratic castle in England,
or the House of Lords,
or the House of Lords, indeed. And I just thought, what's this all about? And that just typified to me the waste, the extravagance, and the way they try and sort of buy you in with all this sort of regalia, and then they give you all sorts of computers and laptops and telephones and iPads, and it was swimming in money, and it felt so unnecessary. And I thought, that's just a tiny microcosm. And then when you first walked into the chamber, and we were in the chamber probably more than anybody, particularly people like Claire, and the chamber was always empty. We were basically the only people ever there speaking. Still, this whole thing was a glorified talking shop that was utterly meaningless, because everything was organised and done behind closed doors, in smoke-filled rooms before it came into the chamber.
Yeah, I think one of the things we did so well as Brexit Party MEPs, we totally disrupted that place from the very, very first bat, when we turned our backs on the national anthem of the European Union. And of course, people say to me, would you do that again? Yes, I would. Yes. I would do it immediately. I'm assuming everybody on this call would do that again. They elevated themselves to the state of a nation. They're not a nation. They're just a talking shop. They're a bogus parliament. Anyway, I'm having my say before it's my turn. Rupert Lowe, let's cut to you. Most ridiculous memories, Rupert Lowe, of the European Union.
Well, I don't think any of us will forget, Martin, that final day where we were waving flags after the vote, and Mairead McGuinness asked us all to leave the chamber. I don't think I'll ever forget that. But for me, like all of you, there were minutes I enjoyed very much, and particularly I enjoyed Gunnar Beck's speeches in the European Parliament, and I find myself going back to watch them. Not only is his content great, his delivery is even better. He's an Anglophile German. He's got a very sharp intellect, and I really enjoyed listening to his speeches. And there was, for some people who are interested there was some genuinely interesting debate in the chamber, albeit, as Richard said, very often we found ourselves as the majority in the chamber when everybody else was enjoying a large lunch out in Strasbourg or Brussels. So that's I won't forget Gunnar Beck, and I met him in London. I think he's an example of the fact that there are Europeans who are basically good people.
Yeah, I mean, there were some amazing moments. I particularly enjoyed calling Guy Verhofstadt Darth Vader.
I remember that.
That was something I greatly enjoyed. Also on the monetary waste, because I used to go along to your committee meetings, Rupert and Ben, because I just wanted to get these facts and create mischief. Well, I found out that every single MEP is allowed £25,000 per month to spend on staff, both in Strasbourg, Brussels, and 25 grand a month per MEP.
It's actually worse than that, Martin, because if you don't spend it, you can carry it forward and spend it all in the last year if you want to.
Absolutely preposterous wastage. And things like the eat all you can buffet, €12 for unlimited lobster. I mean, yeah, they call it the 2 stone term, where people were putting on 2 stone as an MEP, because they were living the largesse lifestyle.
And it was designed for that. It was designed to subdue any opposition to the European Union.
Yeah, superb memories. Right, we're going to move on now. We have a quick play-in before we go to the future and the route map out of this mess we're in. From my fellow MEP and my rooming mates and my Brexit brother, Michael Heaver.
Well, I'm immensely proud of having been part of the Brexit Party effort to stand up for the pro-Brexit majority in our great country. Having campaigned for Brexit for many years, it was amazing to see so many great people from all sorts of backgrounds coming together and saying that we refuse to be ignored, we refuse to be bullied by the Remainer establishment. There was a tremendous camaraderie among the Brexit MEPs that you, the British people, sent to the European Parliament to ensure that their voice could not be ignored and would not be ignored. And many of those people now, I'm proud to say, are good friends. But we went there to ensure that the pro-Brexit majority, that the vote of 17.4 million people in our country simply could not be ignored, and we never lost sight of it.
Okay, so we've had a lot of the memory lane stuff today. We've had a fond look back at some of the highs, some of the ridiculous moments. But now I'd like to move on to the real meat and drink of today's edition of Unlocked. And that is, with our collective expertise as parliamentarians, business people, and in Richard's case, party leader now with Reform, how do we get our way out of this mess? What's a route map forward for an optimistic, bright British future? I'd like to start with Ben Habib, who's got a few ideas. He's going to throw them into the mix, and then everybody on today's call, let's get involved. Let's get some positive ideas down of how to get us out of this mess. Ben Habib.
Well, without looking back in too much detail, I just want to start really with Theresa May's speech on the steps of Downing Street when she talked about the burning injustices. And when I heard that speech, I thought, right, she really gets it. For me, I had felt capitalism had been broken for about 10 or 15 years, actually, that it wasn't working for the general populace, that it wasn't working for small and medium-sized businesses, and something had to be done about it. So for me, when she made that speech, I thought, right, she gets that Brexit is much more than just getting out of the EU. It's unfettering ourselves from this web of regulation and control, getting away from the interests of large corporations and supranational institutions, looking after the electorate of the United Kingdom and the small and medium-sized businesses, sole traders and so on. So for me, looking forward, the opportunities here are to really open it up for the working class and the middle classes of the UK. And we are now unfettered from EU law, so we can cut VAT, which I think we have to. We should cut tax on fuel, which hits the poorest the hardest. We should cut tax on national insurance, which puts more money into their back pockets. And remember, this COVID pandemic has hit the working class a hell of a lot more than the white-collar workers who are sitting at home, you know, working on their computers and actually getting largely unaffected by it. In fact, they're better off as a result of this pandemic. So I think for me, central to a recovery has to be the working classes and middle classes. And then I think as far as small, medium-sized businesses and sole traders and so on are concerned, I think we've got to cut back regulation. We've got to cut back taxes that affect their ability to operate in the real world. You know, we've seen the pandemic boost the profits of online traders, but the real world operators need tax business rates cut. They need corporation tax simplified. They need national insurance cut for the same reason, so that they can employ people without too much of a burden on their books. We need to get that. And by the way, they account for about 90% of businesses in the United Kingdom. So we need to get them on their front foot. And then, without wishing to forget it, you know, 80% of our economy is services. Yeah. So we have, as much as we may or may not like the city, we have to put the city's interest right up front, and we need to deregulate the city, take the fight to Paris, take the fight to Frankfurt. They're very interested in taking over our financial services. We must not allow them to do it. We mustn't be cowed into submission by a desire to do business with the EU. We must deregulate and take the fight to Europe.
Okay, now before I cut to Richard Tice, I know you've got a load of ideas here, Richard. I want to just say this to you. Your critics will say straight away, that's a lot of tax cuts. Where's all that money coming from?
Well, the money is there. You know, there's a lot of debate that one can have about QE. But the fact is that the Bank of England has financed every single penny of government expenditure in 2020, which is about 400 billion. It'll do the same again in 2021, and there'll be another 450 billion. What Rishi Sunak needs to fear is not an over-leveraged economy. What he needs to fear is mass unemployment and a destruction of the UK's economy. That's what he needs to fear. It's not about the money. The money is there if he wants it. He needs a bold vision for growth for the United Kingdom, coming out of the pandemic and coming out of the EU.
Well said. Richard Tice, I'm going to cut straight to you now because I know you've been talking a lot about this, about throwing open the economy after the lockdown. You're the only party leader, as I understand it, who challenges the lockdown. Richard Tice, what kind of idea does the Reform Party have for a bolder, brighter Britain?
Well, I'll follow up with what Ben said, Martin, because actually the only way that we can recover from this terrible crisis, we have to grow our economy, grow our country out of this crisis. You can't tax your way out of it. We've tried that and it doesn't work. So, and as Ben said, if you cut taxes, you actually grow faster as an economy. If you cut unnecessary daft regulation, most of it from the EU, then actually we grow the economy faster because businesses can be more innovative and creative. And if we cut unnecessary government waste, and there's plenty of it, as we all know, then again, the economy can grow faster. And if you grow faster, you've then got more revenues to invest in the things that are so dear to our heart. Of course, in particular, the health service. You know, it's the most loved institution probably in the UK. If we're going to do it, let's do it properly. But to invest in it, you've got to have a well-functioning, fast-growing economy. And they all interact. And a healthy economy leads to healthier lives and longer lives.
OK, I can see Claire Fox is nodding furiously along there. Claire Fox.
So one thing I'm slightly nervous about, though, is that Brexit also was not just an economic decision. It's not that I disagree with what's been said, but look, because, you know, like we're saying there's a material benefit from Brexit now with the vaccines. And by the way, so you know, the European Commission has just confirmed that it's introducing export controls on COVID vaccines made in the EU. Just so that, you know, it's just been announced. So, you know. Okay,
Claire. So on that point, Claire, before we talk about the economics, this is live breaking news. Come on, that is ridiculous. It's disgusting. Claire Fox, live reaction to that decision from the European Union.
It's protectionism. It's mean-spirited. It's punitive because they messed up a contract and they didn't do something, you know, their own precautionary principles stopped them signing something, and they hadn't even agreed the vaccine. They're basically determined to make this vaccine something that instead of it being a great step forward for humanity, is something that they are going to not let anyone else have unless they have it first, or what have you, or punish anyone who's doing very well like the UK. I'm outraged, but not at all surprised. But I do want to come back on the economy thing in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. But before we do that, I want to get a reaction from Ann Widdecombe. Ann Widdecombe, that decision just there has come out. How can that possibly take away from the fact that the European Union has just been exposed as a protection racket that only looks after itself?
Well, it's been a great big protectionist bloc for years. I mean, one of the reasons I was keen to leave with, I think we can actually do much better for the third world in terms of trade, if we can set our own terms of trade instead of the protectionist values that the EU has got. And people think it's some great benign institution. It's not. It's a rotten protectionist bloc. But can I just say, I think, yes, of course, the economics are important here. But there was a fundamental reason that we left the EU, and that was liberty. And the way forward now is to extend that concept of liberty for our nation to the liberty of the individual within the nation. And that means overhauling laws on free speech, for example, which at long last they're thinking about doing. And to me, the way forward now, it's not just the economics, it's the liberty of the individual. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to strike a discordant note. Don't you believe for one moment, folks, that all the regulation came from the EU. We will over-regulate as a pastime in this country. France and Germany will take an EU directive. They'll say, right, they'll translate it into 2 pages of regulations. We will do 42 pages of regulations.
Yeah, well, there's certainly lots of books and books behind you, and maybe they can stick it all in that. Look, I want to go back to Claire Fox. Claire, you're about to make some points on the economy and democracy.
I think it's very important that Anna just stressed liberty, and if I can now stress democracy. People found their voice in that referendum. They realised that they were capable of changing things and that they didn't have to be fated or destined in a particular direction. And the immediate problem was that the EU stopped their democratic decisions being enacted. But Anne says, and she's absolutely right, we brought democratic accountability home. But I can assure you that British politicians are no more likely to act as an accountable body to the UK electorate. It's just we've removed one of the barriers. So one thing I would urge is that anyone planning ahead realises that COVID has shown us that having technocrats who are unelected telling you that you haven't got freedom and telling you what to do has been amplified. It might be an emergency, but will they roll back the legislation? And I suppose that we just need to be ambitious for, you know, in the fishing debacle, what the government thinks is we'll give them 110 million. You know, they think they can buy it off. What people want is an industry that's thriving, not just because they want paying, but because they want a future. So I think we need to invest in, you know, marine science and become a world-beating leader of fishing industry, not just so that people can have money, but so that people can actually say we are in control of our own destinies. That's what Brexit means to me.
Absolutely agree. Sorry, I have to move you on, but I'm about to get some things thrown at me by my director, Alex. Rupert Lowe, I have to bring you back in. Rupert, you've been waiting patiently in the wings. How can we get ourselves out of this mess with some optimistic ideas and also a reaction to what the European Union has just done about the vaccine?
Well, what the European Union has just done is very serious because it is economic protectionism. They are a protectionist bloc, but in isolation, they weren't a problem. If it's going to trigger a series of sort of tit-for-tat retaliation, then it's going to be very serious. Going back to where we are, I agree with what everybody says, and I think we've given the UK a chance. I think our biggest problem now is not anything other than the fact that we have people who are deficient leading us. They don't have an understanding, as Ben said, of what it needs to grow small businesses. We have far too much regulation. We have far too big a state. The state now accounts for something like 55% of GDP. And make no mistake, a lot of the furloughing, a lot of the action that's been taken by Rishi, paid for by QE, is being done to protect jobs in the state, not the private sector. But when we come out of this, it'll be the private sector, the diminished private sector, that will be asked to pay for it again. And the problem, what we need is a complete clear out of inefficient civil servants who are not delivering what they should be delivering on behalf of the British people. But it's hard to see who's going to do that. When you look at the current crop of MPs in the House of Commons, most of whom are, again, deficient because of the selection policies of Cameron and Blair. And I think it underlines the fact that we do need new blood in British politics, and that's why there's such a huge opportunity for reform. And I think Nigel and Richard, as always, have timed it well, named it well, and hopefully it gives the British people an option to go for radical change when finally the penny drops that what we've got in Westminster is just a talking shop.
Rupert, that's certainly food for thought for a future edition of Unlocked. I know we've got a lot of ideas about where we should go politically. Okay. Finally, we'd like to pay tribute to Robert Rowland, a former MEP colleague of ours who passed away last week in a tragic accident. Robert was a father, a husband, a brother and a son, a colleague and a friend, but above all, a proud patriot and a Democrat who gave his all to fight and vote for Brexit. Rupert Lowe, I believe you have a few words you'd like to say.
Yes, I've been devastated by losing Robert. I loved him dearly like a brother. He was one of my closest friends. I spoke to him almost every day about not just politics, but a raft of things. We played tennis together, and I will miss him deeply. But the message I've got for everybody who loved him is he would not want us to go around with long faces and to be unhappy. Robert was a man who lived for every day. Obviously, we'll have an opportunity to pay respect to what he achieved in his life, which was a lot. But I think he'd want us to get on with life and carry out what we all did in the European Parliament and finish the job off. So I can't come to terms with losing Robert, but I think we've got to look for positives, not for negatives.
Great words there, Rupert. We'd like to end this episode of Unlocked today, in fact, by looking at Robert Rowland speaking in the European Parliament, a formidable parliamentarian, as well as a wonderful friend, colleague and man. The final words on today's show go to Robert Rowland.
That was a wonderful ode to Brexit. A little bit depressing, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. I voted for the withdrawal agreement for the simple reason I believe in democracy. We've been going through the charade for almost 4 years, and finally we had an election that has cleared it once and for all. Brexit has finally been delivered. It took us, the Brexit Party, our colleagues here, to be elected into a chamber we don't want to belong to in order to change the course of history. And we have done that. The Brexit Party deserves all the credit for what we're seeing this week. It was only through our courageous stance against the establishment, against the two-party system, that has finally delivered what this country, our great country, voted for, to leave the EU. So I'm immensely proud of what we've achieved. All the colleagues here, it's a beautiful achievement. I know there's been some crocodile tears from the other side, but don't worry. The future is fantastic for Great Britain. We always show Europe the way, and we will do in the future. God bless you all.